I felt the visitor before I saw them, that slight change in air pressure, the faint electric tingle at the base of my skull. I'd gotten good at noticing these signs. Some might call it a sixth sense. The SIU called it a tactical advantage worth paying me obscene amounts of money for. The abandoned warehouse in Boston's industrial district looked empty to anyone else, but I knew better. I fixed my flight suit's calibration and the material tightened around my joints. The Department of Defense spared no expense on our gear. Lightweight carbon mesh armor that could stop most conventional weapons, built-in atmospheric regulators, and communication systems linked directly to headquarters. The suit wasn't what made me valuable, though. It was what I could feel that their satellites and sensors couldn't detect. I walked through the shadows between stacked shipping containers, my erasure weapon ready in my right hand. The gun looked simple enough, matte black, no larger than a standard pistol, but its technology was anything but. One shot dissolved the target's molecular structure, leaving no trace. Clean. Efficient. Final. 5 months ago, I wouldn't have given a second thought to what I was about to do. When the Special Intelligence Unit recruited me, they made everything sound simple. Visitors from the future were unauthorized temporal infiltrators threatening national security. My job was to find them and remove them. I got a signing bonus that paid off my student loans and a monthly check that let me live in a high-rise apartment with a view of the Charles River. All because I could feel when someone didn't belong in this time. Target still in the northeast corner? The voice in my ear belonged to the mission controller back at headquarters. Confirmed, I whispered, knowing the throat mic would pick it up. Moving in now. I crept along the wall, past broken windows and graffiti. The visitor was close. The pressure in my head increased with each step. They had taken the form of a middle-aged man in casual clothes, but there was always something slightly off about visitors. This one's clothes were just a bit too new, his posture too straight for someone supposedly exploring an abandoned building. He was facing away from me, manipulating some kind of device that projected a holographic display only he could see. Standard visitor tech. They always brought tools from their time. I raised my weapon, aiming for the center of his back. One shot, one less temporal threat. That's what my training said. What the SIU had drilled into me through countless simulations and previous field operations. But lately, I'd been noticing things. The visitors never seemed aggressive. They rarely carried weapons. They spent most of their time observing, recording, measuring, like scientists or researchers, not infiltrators or saboteurs. The doubt lasted only a second. I pulled the trigger. The erasure beam hit him squarely between the shoulder blades. He didn't scream. There wasn't time. His body lit up briefly from within, then collapsed into itself, leaving nothing but a slight disturbance in the dust on the floor. I approached the spot where he'd been standing, looking around for any equipment he might have dropped. Protocol required me to collect all visitor technology for SIU analysis. Usually their devices disintegrated with them, some kind of fail-safe tied to their biological signatures. This time was different. Half hidden behind a fallen beam lay a book. I picked it up. No title on the cover or spine. When I opened it, the pages were filled with text in a language I'd never seen before, alongside intricate diagrams and illustrations. Standard procedure was clear. Bag it, tag it, turn it in. But something made me hesitate. Maybe it was how the book had survived when everything else the visitor carried had vanished. Maybe it was the way the strange symbols seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. I made a decision that would change everything. I slipped the book into my suit's cargo pocket. Thompson, report. Target neutralized? The controller again sounding impatient. Target eliminated, I confirmed. No recoverable tech. Area secure. Understood. Return to extraction point. Back at headquarters, I went through the standard debriefing. Mission parameters, target description, method of elimination, confirmation of complete molecular dissolution. I said nothing about the book. For the first time since joining the SIU, I deliberately withheld information. 3 hours later, I sat at my kitchen table, the strange book open in front of me. My apartment lights bounced off the windows. I could see my reflection, dark hair, hazel eyes. I pushed my thoughts away and focused on the book. The text was unlike anything I'd ever seen, not any Earth language I recognized, but the diagrams, those I could make some sense of. They showed what looked like battle formations, troop movements, terrain maps. As I turned the pages, I recognized locations: fields in Europe, deserts in Africa and the Middle East, jungles in Asia and South America. One illustration made me freeze. It showed what could only be the Battle of Gettysburg, but from an angle no artist at that time could have drawn, like it was seen from above. The position of troops matched historical records, but there were details I'd never seen in any history book. Notes in the margins, written in that same strange language, pointing to specific locations on the battlefield. This wasn't just any book. This was a record of human warfare, documented with impossible accuracy and detail. I closed the book and leaned back in my chair, staring out at the Boston skyline. The SIU had told us the visitors were threats, potentially here to change history or gather intelligence that could harm national security. But what if they were something else entirely? What if everything I'd been told, everything I'd done, was based on a lie? I couldn't turn this book over to the SIU, not until I understood what it meant. Not until I knew the truth about the people I'd been killing. I sat in the waiting area outside Director Harris's office, resignation letter in my jacket pocket. 3 weeks had passed since I'd taken the visitor's book, and each night spent studying its mysterious pages had only deepened my conviction that I couldn't continue this work. Harris's assistant nodded at me. "He'll see you now." I walked into the familiar office. Director William Harris stood behind his desk. He didn't offer me a seat. "I was hoping you'd reconsider, Thompson." He tapped my resignation letter, which lay open on his immaculate desk. "This is disappointing." "My decision is final, sir." Harris's blue eyes narrowed. "Do you understand what you're walking away from? The work we do here isn't just about national security. It's about preserving the integrity of our timeline." He leaned forward, palms flat on the desk. "You have a gift, Michael. None of our other agents can sense visitors with your accuracy. Wilson comes close, but even he misses signals you pick up instinctively." I kept my face blank, thinking of the book hidden in my apartment. "I appreciate that, sir, but I've made my decision." "Is this about Boston?" Harris asked. "If you're still bothered by that operation." "It's not about any specific operation," I said, careful to keep my voice steady. "I need a change. That's all." Harris studied me for a long moment. "You know, once you leave, your security clearance is revoked. The special stipend, the equipment, the protection, all of it goes away." I nodded. "I understand. And the confidentiality agreement remains in effect for life. You never talk about what you did here, to anyone." His voice held no threat, just cold certainty. "Of course." I met his gaze directly. After a moment, Harris sighed and sat down. "Very well. Your resignation is accepted, effective immediately. Security will escort you to clean out your desk." I stood to leave. "Thompson?" Harris called as I reached the door. "The door is always open if you change your mind. Some people find civilian life less fulfilling." I didn't look back as I left. 6 months later, my apartment in Portland looked nothing like my Boston high-rise. No big windows, no fancy furniture, no view of the river. Just a simple one-bedroom with floors that made noise when I walked to the kitchen. I'd taken a job as a security consultant for a tech company. Nothing exciting, but it paid the bills and didn't involve killing anyone. That morning, I sat at my second-hand table eating cereal when my phone buzzed with a news alert. I almost dropped my spoon when I saw the headline, terrorist attack in Denver claims over 3,000 lives. The video showed smoke coming from a residential neighborhood. Officials called it a chemical attack, but the way the smoke curved upward in that spiral pattern, I knew what it really was. I'd seen training videos of temporal vessel malfunctions. I spent the next hour looking through news sites for details that would confirm what I thought. The official story said a terrorist cell had released an unknown chemical agent in the suburb of Lakewood, but the descriptions of the victims, found with no external injuries, their internal organs showing signs of rapid molecular breakdown, matched exactly what happened when temporal energy was released uncontrolled. Someone had shot down a visitor's vessel, and now thousands of innocent people were dead. I paced my small living room with the book on my coffee table. I hadn't made much progress translating it, but I'd spent hours looking at those diagrams of historical battles, getting more convinced that these threats were simply observers, not enemies. After another hour of going back and forth, I picked up my phone and called a number I'd promised myself I wouldn't use. 3 rings then. "Wilson." "It's me," I said. A pause. "Mike? Jesus, I didn't expect to hear from you." James sounded tired. "How have you been?" "Cut the small talk, Jim. Denver wasn't a terrorist attack." The silence on the line lasted so long, I thought he'd hung up. Finally, "You shouldn't be talking about this. Not on this line, not on any line. I need to know what happened." Another pause. "Look, I can't." 3,000 people, Jim. Families, kids." I heard him take a deep breath. "Meet me at Powell's Books. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., rare book room. Come alone." He hung up before I could respond. Powell's took up an entire city block, its rooms color-coded and filled with new and used books. I found the rare book room easily enough and spotted James looking through old books in the corner. He looked up as I approached, his gray eyes checking behind me before he spoke. "You're not wearing a wire, are you?" "Nice to see you too," I said, keeping my voice low. James grimaced. "Sorry, it's been a rough week." He looked thinner than when I'd left, the shadows under his eyes darker. "Denver," I said. He nodded once, then took me deeper into the stacks where we wouldn't be overheard. It was supposed to be a standard elimination. Intel picked up unusual temporal energy readings near Lakewood. Harris sent 2 teams, me and Rollins, plus Chen's crew. What went wrong? James ran a hand over his face. Everything. This visitor wasn't on foot like usual. They had some kind of vehicle. First time we've ever seen that. Rollins got spooked and fired before getting proper confirmation. Hit the pilot. My stomach tightened. And the vessel crashed. Yeah, but that's not the worst part. James lowered his voice further. Harris knew the risks. Chen warned him that hitting the vessel could cause catastrophic temporal energy release, but Harris gave the order anyway. Said eliminating the technology was worth the risk. I leaned against a bookshelf trying to process this. They sacrificed a whole neighborhood to keep the technology out of government hands, our government's hands. It's gotten worse since you left, Mike. Harris has us eliminating visitors at twice the previous rate. The official explanation is increased temporal intrusion, but he shook his head. Something doesn't add up. They're not threats, I said, testing his reaction. James didn't look surprised. I'm starting to think the same thing. The one in Denver. Before Rollins shot the pilot, I saw inside their vessel through my scope. They had what looked like recording equipment, scientific instruments, not weapons. I wanted to tell him about the book, but I held back. Why the increased elimination rate? Harris says it's to protect something called timeline integrity, but he won't elaborate. Command is nervous about something. James checked his watch. I need to go. Being seen with you would raise questions. Be careful, Jim. You too. He hesitated, then added, They still have your file marked as potential re-recruitment. Harris thinks you'll come back eventually. I almost laughed at that. Not happening. After James left, I walked around Powell's without really seeing the books. By the time I got back to my apartment, I'd made my decision. It took me less than a week to sell what little furniture I owned, close my bank accounts, and put my important stuff into one duffel bag and a backpack. The book stayed with me at all times, wrapped in cloth and tucked into my backpack's inner pocket. Standing in the empty apartment, I looked around one last time. 6 months of hiding in plain sight, trying to build a normal life while knowing what I knew. I couldn't do it anymore. Not with the Denver body count rising every day as more people die from the time energy. I'd booked a one-way ticket to Buenos Aires, leaving that night. South America seemed far enough away to buy me time to figure out my next steps. I'd learned a little Spanish in the military, and Argentina's universities were good. Maybe I could find someone there to help me figure out the book. What mattered was getting distance from the SIU and the country where I'd once killed people for a living, believing I was protecting national security when I was really helping cover up the truth. As I locked the apartment door for the last time, I thought about all the visitors I'd killed over the years. Were they all just historians, researchers trying to record our past for a future that had somehow lost its own history? How many scholars had I murdered because someone wanted to control the story? Whatever secrets it contained, I owed it to its original owner, and to all the others I'd killed, to find out what was really going on. The last page of my Argentine visa application sat on the desk in my cheap Lima hostel room. This would be my 4th country in 2 years. Ecuador, Colombia, Peru, each had given me a place to stay for a while, but no answers. South America had become where I hid, and where I searched for someone who could help me understand the book I'd carried across continents. I looked at my new identity papers on the desk. Michael Baker, Canadian citizen, freelance historical researcher. The fake ID was really good. It cost me nearly 1/3 of my remaining money. The passport photo showed a face I barely recognized anymore, with a beard and longer hair than I'd ever worn during my SIU days. My backpack was open on the bed, everything carefully organized so I could leave quickly. Clothes, toiletries, emergency cash in various currencies, a small laptop with good security, and at the bottom, wrapped in cloth and sealed in a waterproof bag, the book. After 2 years on the move, I'd learned to travel light but prepared. The dead ends had been countless. University professors who said the text was just a fake. Code experts who tried normal decoding methods only to get stuck. Anthropologists who couldn't connect the language to any known human communication system. I'd been careful with each approach, using cover stories about finding the book in my grandfather's attic or buying it at an estate sale. I never showed the full contents to anyone, just selected pages, and I never stayed in one place long enough for people to get suspicious. The next morning, I got on a bus headed for the Bolivian border, the first part of my journey to Argentina. As mountains changed to plains and eventually to the big city of Buenos Aires, I felt a little hopeful. The University of Buenos Aires had one of the most respected linguistics departments in South America. If answers existed anywhere, they might be there. Spring had come to Buenos Aires when I finally got a meeting with Dr. Emily Parker. Her name had shown up many times in academic journals about extinct language patterns. An American living abroad who had built her career studying communication systems that had disappeared. She was my best remaining lead. The university campus was busy as I walked to the linguistics building. Students sat on patches of grass between classes, their voices making a nice background noise that helped hide my approach. Years of being careful had become habit. I still looked for anyone following me, still found exit routes, still sat with my back to walls. Dr. Parker's office door was slightly open. I knocked gently. "Come in," she called, her voice carrying a slight trace of her Midwestern American origins despite years in Argentina. I entered to find a very organized space. Dr. Parker's room had neatly labeled shelves of reference books, organized papers, and a desk with only her current work on it. She looked up from her computer and pushed her rectangular glasses higher on her nose. "Dr. Parker, I'm Michael Baker. Thank you for agreeing to meet me." She stood and offered her hand. "Please call me Emily. Your email mentioned an unusual text you're researching." I nodded, taking out a photocopied page from my folder. I'd learned not to bring the real book to first meetings. "I came across this during my research. The language doesn't match any known classification system. I've consulted with several experts, but no one has been able to identify it." Emily took the page, studying it with an intensity that made me hopeful. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she traced the strange symbols with her index finger. "Where did you find this?" she asked, not looking up from the page. "Family collection," I replied with my practiced lie. "My grandfather was something of an amateur collector. After he passed, I found this among his things." She made a non-committal sound and continued examining the text. After several minutes of silence, she finally spoke. "This is unusual. The structure suggests a logographic system, but with elements of syllabic writing. There's an internal consistency that rules out random invention." She looked up at me. "You said this is just one page? There's more?" "A full book. And you're certain it's not a constructed language, not some elaborate coded journal or creative project?" "That's what I'm trying to determine," I said carefully. Emily's analytical gaze made me feel transparent. "Mr. Baker..." "Michael, please." "Michael, I deal with academic integrity every day. Students who plagiarize research claims that can't be verified. Whatever this is, I need complete honesty about its provenance before I invest any time in it." I met her eyes, thinking about how much truth I could afford to reveal. "I can't tell you exactly how I obtained it. What I can tell you is that understanding this text might be more important than you can imagine." She leaned back in her chair, looking at me rather than the page. "That's not much to go on." "I know, but I can show you more of the content. The book contains diagrams and illustrations alongside the text. They depict historical events with a level of detail that's difficult to explain." She looked torn between being curious and not believing it. Finally, she sighed. "Bring the book tomorrow. I'll take a quick look. No promises beyond that. If I suspect it's a forgery or hoax, our discussion ends there. That's all I'm asking for." As I left her office, walking back through the busy campus, I had finally made progress. 2 years of searching had led to this moment. Whether Emily Parker would be my breakthrough or just another dead end remained to be seen. Emily's eyes widened as she carefully turned the pages of the book. We sat in her private research lab rather than her office, a secure room requiring keycard access with no windows and considerably better privacy. 3 days had passed since our first meeting, and after an initial examination, she had agreed to study the book more thoroughly. "These illustrations," she murmured, pointing to a detailed aerial depiction of what I'd identified as the Battle of Waterloo. "The perspective is impossible. No one in the early 19th century could have created this viewpoint." "That's what caught my attention too," I said, watching her reactions carefully. "There are dozens more like that throughout the book." Emily pulled a magnifying glass from her desk drawer and bent closer to examine the text surrounding the illustration. "The language itself is fascinating. It has internal consistency and grammatical logic, but it doesn't align with any known linguistic family." "Can you translate it?" She looked up, pushing her glasses back into place. "Not immediately, but with time and the right approach, maybe. These diagrams provide contextual clues we can use as anchors. If the illustrations truly depict historical events as you believe, we can cross-reference the symbols appearing near known elements." "How long would that take?" "Months, not days," she said frankly, "and I'd need secure access to the book for extended periods." I hesitated. I hadn't let the book out of my hand since I'd taken it from the visitor in Boston. Emily seemed to sense my reluctance. "This lab has restricted access. Only I and one graduate assistant have key cards. and I can make sure they have no reason to enter while we're working. The room has cameras, but I can arrange for the system to be turned off during our sessions, saying it's for privacy reasons on a classified research project. You'd do that? Risk your academic reputation on something you can't even verify? She pointed to the open book. Look at this picture of an air battle from what looks like very old Mesopotamia. There's no way anyone could have made this with what they had back then. The language fascinates me, but these pictures shouldn't even exist. She looked right at me. That's why this is the most exciting project I've come across. I needed to decide. Without Emily, I probably couldn't figure out what the book meant. After searching for 2 years, I hadn't found anyone better to help me. Plus, her straightforward way of working made me trust her. All right, I said finally. But I have conditions. The book never leaves this lab. No photographs, no scans, no copies leave the room, and I need to be present during all research sessions. Emily nodded. Agreed. I'll clear my schedule to focus on this. We can begin tomorrow morning. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Emily and I developed a routine, meeting early each morning in her lab before campus became busy. I would retrieve the book from its hiding place, a rented safety deposit box at a nearby bank, and bring it to the lab where Emily would work on it until evening. Then I would return it to its secure storage. Emily tackled the translation like a scientist. She built a database of symbols, comparing them with the illustrations and known historical events. Bit by bit, patterns started to show up. Some symbols always appeared near pictures of weapons, while others were grouped around maps of land or how troops moved. I rented a small apartment near the university, paying 6 months in advance with cash. My days were spent in Emily's lab, watching her work and helping when I could. At night, I stayed on alert, checking news reports for any SIU activity, moving my cash between different spots, and practicing the escape plans that had kept me alive for 2 years. 3 months into our work, Emily made her first breakthrough. Look at this, she said, pointing to a sequence of symbols that appeared repeatedly throughout the book. I believe this is a date marker. If I'm right, the text is chronologically organized, documenting events in historical sequence. She showed me her notes, where she'd mapped symbols to specific time periods based on the accompanying illustrations. This section clearly relates to the American Civil War. These symbols appear nowhere in earlier sections, but become common in later ones. They likely represent concepts or technology that didn't exist previously. Her approach was working. By month 4, we had established a basic understanding of the book's organizational structure. By month 5, Emily could recognize certain repeated phrases and their probable meanings. The text wasn't just describing battles. It analyzed them, looking at strategies, outcomes, and historical importance. Through it all, Emily never asked direct questions about where the book had come from, but I caught her studying me sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking. The breakthrough came during our 6th month of work. I arrived at the lab to find Emily already there, eyes red from lack of sleep but looking really excited. I've got it, she said as soon as I entered, not bothering with our usual morning greeting. I finally understand what we're looking at. She led me to her desk where pages of notes were spread out alongside printouts of historical battle maps. Look at these sections I've translated, she said, pointing to her neatly written interpretations of several passages. This isn't just a record of history. It's an analysis written from a perspective far removed from the events themselves. I leaned closer, reading her translation notes. The conflict known as World War II represents a critical juncture in human development of mechanized warfare. Previous scholarly reconstructions based on fragmentary records failed to capture the tactical significance of weather conditions during the Normandy landing operations. And this section, Emily continued, flipping to another page. The value of this direct observational record cannot be overstated, as the great data collapse of 2187 left significant gaps in historical understanding of pre-modern combat techniques. My pulse quickened. 2187? Emily nodded, her expression serious. There are multiple references to events in the 23rd century throughout the text. Whoever wrote this was looking backward at our time from a future perspective. She paused, watching my reaction. Michael, this isn't just a book about wars. It's a historical document from the future. I sat down heavily in the chair beside her desk. The visitors, the people I'd been trained to hunt and kill, weren't spies or enemies. They were scholars, historians recording our present for a future where that knowledge had somehow been lost. There's more, Emily said, her voice gentler now. Based on what I've translated, it appears that the authors of this book are engaged in direct observation research because of something called the Great Data Collapse. Some kind of massive loss of historical records in their time. They're not changing events. They're witnessing them because their own historical record is incomplete. My hands trembled slightly as I looked at the pages spread before me. All those visitors I'd eliminated with a single pull of the trigger. Each one had been a researcher, a scholar trying to preserve human knowledge that would otherwise be lost. The SIU knows, I said, more to myself than to Emily. They have to know what the visitors really are. Emily looked confused. SIU? What is that? I looked at her, realizing I'd said too much. But after 6 months of working together, perhaps it was time for some honesty. Special Intelligence Unit, a government agency I used to work for. I took a deep breath. They're the ones hunting the people who wrote this book. She finally got it. That's why you've been so secretive. Why you need to translate this so badly. It wasn't a question. Yes. I looked down at the book, at the meticulous records created by people who had traveled across time to witness history firsthand, people I had helped eliminate. I was told they were threats to national security, that they were here to interfere with our timeline or gather intelligence that could harm our country. But they're historians, Emily said, her voice filled with academic indignation. They're preserving knowledge that would otherwise be lost. And I killed them for it. The words felt like stones in my mouth. Emily was quiet for a while, thinking it all over. Finally, she asked, "What will you do now that you know the truth?" I looked at the book and thought about all the work that went into it. Not just our 6 months of translation, but all the time spent by visitors writing down human history, making records they never planned to take out of their time. How many of those researchers had I killed myself? How many holes in future knowledge had I made with my weapon? I don't know yet, I admitted. But I can't let the SIU continue hunting them. I can't let more historians die because someone wants to control the narrative. Emily picked up her translation notes, organizing them methodically as she gathered her thoughts. We need to be careful about how we proceed. If this government agency has been deliberately eliminating historical researchers from the future, they won't hesitate to silence us for knowing the truth. You don't have to get involved any further, I said. This could be dangerous. These people, my former colleagues, they have resources, training. They're not going to stop because we know the truth. Emily gave me a determined look that I hadn't seen before. You brought me a linguistic puzzle that's also probably the most important historical document ever discovered. Do you really think I'm walking away now? I smiled a little. I guess not. Good. Then we need a plan. She tapped her finger on the translation notes. We've only scratched the surface of what this book contains. There could be information about when and where these historians appear, patterns that might help us find them before your former agency does. I nodded, my mind already working through possibilities. You're right. If we can predict where they'll show up, maybe we can warn them. Maybe we can help them complete their work without being detected. For the first time in 2 years, maybe for the first time since leaving the SIU, I felt like I had a real purpose again. not just trying to stay alive. I used to work for a system that killed people for trying to save the truth. Now I had the chance to protect that truth instead. "Let's get back to work," I said, pulling my chair closer to the desk. "There's still a lot of book to translate." Emily nodded, her academic focus returning as she spread out her notes. Together we bent over the Book of Wars, searching for patterns that might help us save the future's connection to its past. I sat in a cramped internet cafe in Santiago, surrounded by teenagers playing online games and tourists video calling home. The very old desktop computer made loud noises as I put the finishing touches on my website. After weeks of coding between translation sessions with Emily, the site was finally ready to launch. Hidden behind layers of encryption and accessible only through specialized browsers, it contained everything I'd learned about the SIU, the visitors, and their true purpose as historians. The decision to share this information hadn't come easily. Emily and I had spent days debating the risks after our breakthrough in understanding the book. In the end, we agreed that the truth needed to reach others who might help protect these time-traveling scholars. More importantly, I hoped to find others like me, people who could sense the visitor's presence. I looked around the cafe, checking for anyone paying too much attention to my screen. Finding no obvious observers, I uploaded the final file and activated the site. The small green confirmation message felt anticlimactic given the risk I'd just taken. I cleared the browser history, paid for my time, and left. Outside, Santiago's evening traffic filled the streets. I kept my head down as I walked the 12 blocks back to my apartment through a different route than usual. The city had been home for 3 months now, ever since Emily and I agreed it was safer to separate after our work translating the core sections of the book. She had returned to Argentina with copies of our notes, while I traveled west to Chile with the book itself. 2 nights later, I was updating the website with additional translations when my phone buzzed. The text was from my landlady. "Men in suits asking about you. Government ID." I got startled. I shut down the laptop immediately and grabbed my emergency bag from under the bed. Within 90 seconds, I had the book secured in my backpack along with my laptop, cash reserves, and essential documents. The SIU had found me faster than I'd anticipated. I heard footsteps in the stairwell as I slipped out onto the fire escape. The metal groaned under my weight, but held as I went down into the narrow alley behind the building. As my feet hit the ground, I heard the crash of my apartment door being forced open 3 floors above. I pulled my cap lower over my face and walked, not ran, toward the street. Running attracted attention. Blending into a group of young professionals heading to dinner, I put 6 blocks between myself and the apartment before ducking into a 24-hour bus terminal. I bought a ticket for the first northbound bus using cash, and 3 hours later I was crossing into Peru. The small hotel room in Lima had paper-thin walls that let me hear every conversation in the hallway. I sat on the edge of the bed, laptop open but not connected to the internet. That would have to wait until I found a public network I could use briefly without leaving digital footprints. 4 days had passed since my escape from Santiago. I'd abandoned my Michael Baker identity, now traveling as David Weiss, another carefully prepared alias with Canadian documentation. The book remained with me always, either in my backpack or, while I slept, tucked under the mattress beneath me. I couldn't stop thinking about what had triggered the raid. Had I been too careless with my internet usage? Had Emily been compromised? Or was the website itself somehow traceable despite the precautions I'd taken? Whatever the cause, I needed to be even more careful going forward. The next morning, I found an internet cafe in a tourist district and checked the encrypted email address I'd created for the website. There were 17 messages. Most were skeptics or conspiracy theorists, but 3 showed genuine interest from people who had encountered unexplainable phenomena that matched visitor appearances. None mentioned sensing abilities like mine. I spent an hour replying to those 3 messages, asking specific questions that only someone who had truly encountered a visitor would be able to answer. Then I deleted my browsing history, paid in cash, and left. Over the next 2 weeks, I continued north through Peru, never staying more than 2 nights in the same place. Bus stations, budget hotels, and crowded markets became my daily environment. I checked messages when I could, maintained the website, and continued adding translations from sections of the book Emily and I had only partially deciphered. During quiet evenings in anonymous hotel rooms, I began to notice something in the visitors' documentation that Emily and I had missed during our initial translations. There was a pattern to the historical events they chose to observe. It wasn't random. The future historians seemed to follow a methodical timeline, documenting major conflicts chronologically, but also appearing at the sites of minor skirmishes or undocumented military operations. I began tracking these patterns, creating a handwritten log of dates and locations mentioned in the book. If the visitors followed consistent protocols, it might be possible to predict where and when they would appear next. That knowledge could be invaluable, both for avoiding the SIU and potentially making contact with the visitors themselves. By the time I reached Bogota, Colombia, my notebook contained dozens of potential appearance sites based on historical battle anniversaries and locations of conflicts not widely documented in conventional history. I was particularly interested in a pattern of visitor observations around classified Cold War operations, events that aligned with my own military background and knowledge of undocumented interventions. I arrived in Cartagena with its oppressive coastal heat and crowds of tourists. I'd chosen it for exactly that reason. Easy to blend in, multiple transportation options, and excellent internet connectivity catering to foreign visitors. The colonial architecture provided plenty of narrow streets and blind corners that made surveillance difficult, and the constant flow of travelers meant new faces attracted little attention. I sat at an outdoor cafe, sipping coffee and using the establishment's Wi-Fi through a secure connection. 3 months had passed since my escape from Santiago. The website had grown into a small but dedicated community of individuals sharing experiences with temporal anomalies and unidentified observers. I moderated carefully, wary of SIU agents attempting to infiltrate the group. My email notification chimed softly. I opened the message, expecting another report of strange atmospheric changes or unexplained observers at historical sites. Instead, I found something that made me sit straighter in my chair. I know what you are. I feel them too. The pressure change, the electric tingle at the base of the skull. Been happening since I was a kid. Found others like us. Need to meet. Verification code, temporal sensitive type 3. The message included no name, no location, just an encrypted contact protocol. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. This could be exactly what I'd been searching for. Another person with my ability to sense visitors, but it could also be an SIU trap. The verification code caught my attention. Temporal sensitive type 3 was SIU classification terminology, something I'd never mentioned on the website. Either this person had SIU connections, or they had independently encountered the same classification system, suggesting the existence of other agencies tracking visitor phenomena. I spent the next 3 days establishing secure communication channels and requesting specific verification information that would be difficult for the SIU to fabricate. The responses came with details about sensing experiences that matched my own too precisely to be guesswork. The specific pressure behind the eyes, the tingling sensation that preceded a visitor's arrival by exactly 27 seconds, the lingering metallic taste afterward. These were sensory details I'd never shared publicly. Finally satisfied this wasn't a trap, I sent a message proposing a meeting location: Mexico City's Chapultepec Park, near the History Museum. A location with multiple escape routes, crowded enough to make surveillance difficult, yet open enough to spot obvious threats. The response came within hours, 8 days. Noon. By the fountain. I'll find you. That night, I booked a series of bus tickets that would take me north through Colombia to Panama, then flights under different identities to Guatemala, and finally Mexico. As I packed my few possessions, I realized I felt something I hadn't experienced since discovering the truth about the visitors. hope. If there were others who shared my ability, who could sense the visitors and understood what they truly were, perhaps we could form a network to protect them. Perhaps we could ensure that the future's connection to its past remained intact, despite the SIU's efforts to control the historical narrative. I tucked the book securely in my backpack and checked out of my hotel before sunrise. I was heading to Mexico City, and with it maybe an ally in this lonely fight for historical truth. I circled the fountain in Chapultepec Park for the third time, checking for anyone watching me while pretending to read a tourist map. Noon had come and gone 7 minutes ago. My contact was late, or worse, they'd spotted something that scared them off. After 8 days of careful travel through Central America, changing identities twice and transportation methods 5 times, I'd arrived in Mexico City only to face the possibility of another dead end. A woman walked past me, then stopped abruptly about 10 feet away. She was around 30, with long black hair tied in a neat braid and alert dark eyes that looked around the area quickly. Nothing about her seemed unusual. Practical clothing in neutral colors, a small backpack, the casual stance of any tourist enjoying the park. Yet something in the way she checked our surroundings reminded me of myself. I had the same habits now. She didn't approach directly. Instead, she took a seat on a bench where she could see both me and the surrounding pathways. Our eyes met briefly. She gave a slight nod toward a vendor selling corn down the path, then stood and walked in that direction. I waited 30 seconds before following, keeping my distance while watching her move through the crowd. If this was an SIU trap, they would have multiple agents positioned throughout the park. I looked at every face I passed, checking for government agents. I saw nothing suspicious. The woman bought corn from the vendor and continued walking toward the museum area. I followed her past the entrance, through a courtyard, and into a dark corridor connecting 2 exhibition halls. There she stopped and turned. "You're Michael Thompson," she said, not a question, a statement. I didn't confirm or deny, keeping my expression neutral. "My name is Sarah Martinez. I sent you the message about sensing them." "Verification code?" I asked, still maintaining distance. "Temporal sensitive type 3, she replied, then added, "The pressure builds behind your eyes first, right? Then the tingling starts at the base of your skull exactly 27 seconds before they appear." The details matched my experience exactly, information I'd never published online. "How did you find me?" I asked. "Your website. The way you described the visitors, their appearances at historical sites. It matched my own observations too perfectly to be coincidence." She glanced around the empty corridor. "This isn't the place for this conversation. I have an apartment in Roma Norte with secure communications. We can talk there." I thought about what to do. Meeting in a public place was safer than following a stranger to a private location. But if Sarah really had the same ability as me, if she could actually sense visitors, the information she had might be worth the risk. "Lead the way," I said, "but we take precautions." Sarah nodded once, understanding right away. 3 separate transportation changes, no direct route. "You set the last leg, so I don't know our final destination until we're there." She spoke my language, the language of someone who understood security not from a manual, but from necessity. 2 hours and 4 transportation changes later, one more than even Sarah had suggested. We arrived at her apartment building on a quiet residential street. I was impressed by her security setup. The apartment had 2 entry points, clear views of all approach routes, and windows that opened onto a rear fire escape. Inside, signal-blocking curtains covered the windows, and a white noise generator made a soft buzz in the background. "Military?" I asked, recognizing the systematic approach to security. "No, self-taught." Sarah moved around the apartment with practiced efficiency, checking security feeds on a tablet before setting it down. "When you spend your life seeing things no one else sees, you learn to be careful." The apartment itself was sparsely furnished. A table with 2 chairs, a couch that looked barely used, and walls covered in maps, photos, and handwritten notes connected by colored string. One entire section was dedicated to a timeline spanning decades. "How long have you been tracking them?" I asked, studying the meticulous documentation. "Since I was 19. That's when I realized what I was sensing wasn't just headaches or anxiety. Sarah pulled 2 water bottles from a small refrigerator and handed one to me. "But I've had the ability since childhood. The first time I remember feeling it, I was 7. My family was visiting Gettysburg. The mention of Gettysburg sent a jolt through me. The book's detailed illustration of that battle had been one of the first things that made me question the SIU's narrative about the visitors." "What happened at Gettysburg?" "Nothing dramatic. I felt strange. Like the air changed pressure and everything seemed charged with electricity. My mother thought I was getting sick. Later that day, I saw a man taking notes near Little Round Top. He didn't look like the other tourists. Too intent, too focused. He noticed me watching him and seemed surprised, almost scared. Then he walked into a wooded area and never came out." She took a sip of water. "I went looking for him. Found nothing but disturbed leaves and a strange smell like ozone." Her experience mirrored countless operations I'd conducted for the SIU. The visitor she'd seen as a child had likely been eliminated by agents like me within hours of his appearance. "When did you realize others could sense them too?" I asked. 2 years ago. I found a forum online where people described similar experiences, pressure changes, electrical sensations, observing people who seemed out of place at historical sites. Most were dismissed as conspiracy theorists, but 3 of us recognized that we were experiencing the same phenomenon. Sarah walked to her wall of research. We started comparing notes, tracking patterns. One lives in Toronto, another in Buenos Aires. "You're the 4th we've found." "And the others? Can they sense the visitors like we do?" Sarah nodded. "Same symptoms, same timing, 27 seconds of warning before a visitor appears. We've been trying to understand why we have this ability and how to use it." I put my water bottle down and grabbed my backpack. "I think I can help with that." I took out the book and put it on the table. Sarah looked surprised when I unwrapped it from its protective cloth. "What is that?" "They call it the Book of Wars. It belongs to the visitors." I opened it to the section Emily and I had partially translated. "They're historians, Sarah, from the future." For the next 2 hours, I explained everything. The SIU, my role as an elimination specialist, my discovery of the book, and Emily's breakthrough in translating it. Sarah listened without interruption, occasionally comparing my information against her own research on the wall. When I finished, she walked to her timeline and pointed to a series of marked dates. "These are all confirmed visitor sightings. Red pins are ones I sensed personally. Blue are reported by my contacts." Her finger traced a pattern across years of documentation. "They're not random. There's a clear focus on military conflicts and their anniversaries, but not just famous battles. They appear at sites of classified operations, covert actions that never made official history." I joined her at the wall, studying her work. Her approach was different from mine, but we ended up with similar conclusions. While I had focused on the book's contents, Sarah had created a summary of the visitor appearances themselves. "Look at the frequency," she said, pointing to clusters of pins. Appearances increased dramatically starting in 2015 with major spikes every 18 months. If the pattern holds, we're entering another spike period now. "That aligns with what the book suggests," I said. "They seem to work in research cycles, documenting events chronologically, but with multiple teams operating simultaneously." Sarah turned to me, her expression intense. "If they're historians trying to record what actually happened, why is your former organization so determined to stop them?" "Control of the narrative," I said simply. "The SIU, and whoever they answer to, don't want certain operations documented even for future generations. They're using national security as cover for historical revisionism." Sarah nodded as if this confirmed a long-held suspicion. "I've been tracking government response patterns too." She pulled a folder from beneath a stack of papers and spread its contents on the table. Federal agents appear at approximately 68% of confirmed visitor sites within 2 hours of a visitor manifestation. That suggests a detection system, I finished her thought. The SIU has technology that alerts them to temporal disturbances. But they're always too late, Sarah said. Unless they have someone like us. The realization hit me. That's why the SIU recruited me. People with our ability give them advance warning. Sarah pulled out another document, a printed email with government headers partially visible. 3 weeks ago, this came through one of my encrypted channels. A former analyst leaked information about an SIU operation called Project Sentinel. They're actively searching for people with our ability. I read through the document and felt sick. Project Sentinel wasn't just recruiting people like us. It was studying the biological signs of our ability to sense time changes, trying to make tech that could do what we do naturally. Where did you get this? My contact in Buenos Aires has government connections. Sarah took the document back. There's something else you should know. They've tracked your website activities to Mexico. You've been compromised. I kept thinking about what this meant. If the SIU had tracked me to Mexico, they would have sent a team right away. The question wasn't if they were coming, but when they'd get here. Who would they send? Sarah asked. James Wilson, I said without hesitation. He worked with me for years, knows how I think, how I move. I started packing the book back into my bag. We need to leave. Find another location to continue this conversation. Sarah caught my arm, stopping me. Wait, before we go, there's something in my research you need to see. She walked to her computer and pulled up a series of satellite images showing Washington, D.C. Next to them, she displayed a calendar with multiple dates circled. These are all classified operations conducted during the Cold War. Black sites, interrogations, covert meetings between officials and foreign agents. Notice anything? I studied the images, then the dates. These all correspond to visitor appearances in your timeline. Yes, but look at the pattern of appearances in D.C. specifically. She pointed to a series of red pins clustered around dates in June. 3 years ago, 6 visitors appeared within a half-mile radius of the Lincoln Memorial, all on the anniversary of something called Operation Blackstone. The name hit me like a physical blow. Operation Blackstone was a classified 1980s military intervention I'd learned about during my SIU training, an operation so sensitive that most of its details remained sealed even decades later. The anniversary is next week, Sarah continued. Based on the 3-year cycle I've documented, there's a 92% probability that a visitor will appear at the same location to continue documenting Blackstone. I understood immediately what she was suggesting. You want to intercept them. Make contact before the SIU gets there. Sarah nodded. If these visitors are truly historians trying to document erased events, helping them could be the most important thing either of us ever does. I thought about all the risks. Going back to the United States meant walking right into where the SIU had the most control. DC would be heavily watched, especially around sensitive historical sites. If James was indeed tracking me, he would know all my methods, my training. He knew how I worked. But the possibility of making direct contact with a visitor, of helping save historical truth rather than erasing it, was worth the risk. Washington is definitely where the SIU would expect me to avoid, I said, thinking through the strategic implications, which gives us a small advantage of surprise. I have clean identities we can use, Sarah said, transportation routes that avoid normal detection. If we move quickly, we can be in position before your former colleague arrives in Mexico City and realizes he's lost your trail. I looked over Sarah's wall of research one more time, taking in the years of careful work she'd done on her own, pushed by the same questions that had bothered me since finding the book. Her methods were different but matched well with mine. Together, we might actually succeed where I had been struggling alone. When do we leave? I asked. Sarah began taking down the most crucial elements of her research. 2 hours. Pack only what you absolutely need." As she dismantled her years of work, carefully storing key documents in a secure case, I watched with new respect. I'd spent 2 years running, hiding, and searching. Sarah had spent much longer tracking the same mystery from a different angle. Now, our paths had come together with a shared goal: to protect what connects the future to its past. The Washington operation would be dangerous, perhaps the most dangerous thing I'd done since leaving the SIU. But for the first time since finding the book, I wasn't working alone. The knowledge brought both comfort and anxiety. More lives than mine would now be at risk. I touched the book inside my backpack. The historians who had created it had traveled across time to document truth. The least I could do was cross borders to help them complete their work. I stood near the base of the Lincoln Memorial, pretending to photograph the reflecting pool while actually looking around the crowds for anyone out of place. Sarah and I had arrived in Washington, D.C. 3 days earlier, using separate routes and the clean identities she'd provided. Mine listed me as Daniel Matthews, a high school history teacher from Oregon on summer vacation. The fake glasses and lighter hair color wouldn't fool facial recognition software for long, but they might buy precious seconds if we ran into the SIU. We'd been really careful with our prep work. We'd rented rooms in different hotels on opposite sides of the city, paying cash and staying away from security cameras when possible. We'd bought prepaid phones, used only for quick coded text messages. We'd memorized multiple escape routes from every major tourist site in the capital. And most importantly, we'd studied the patterns of visitor appearances that Sarah had tracked over years of watching and waiting. Operation Blackstone's anniversary had brought us here. According to Sarah's research, the classified 1980s military intervention had drawn future historians 3 times in the past decade, always to this area, always within a 100-yard radius of the memorial. If the pattern held, another visitor would show up today to continue documenting what the government had tried to erase from history. The early June heat was intense as tourists streamed up and down the memorial steps. Sarah stayed in position across the reflecting pool, her dark hair tucked under a baseball cap, sunglasses hiding her eyes. We'd been in place since dawn, taking turns circling the area, watching for both the visitor and any sign of SIU presence. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "School group at North Entrance. Guide looks wrong." I casually turned toward the north side of the memorial, where a group of middle school students gathered around a man with a tour badge. From this distance, he looked normal enough. Khaki shorts, polo shirt, clipboard, but something about his posture seemed too stiff, too alert. I sent back, "Noted," continuing circuit. The morning stretched into afternoon. The heat got worse, driving some tourists to find shade or air-conditioned museums. I stayed put, sipping occasionally from a water bottle, playing the part of a history enthusiast too dedicated to leave. Then it happened. The air pressure subtly changed. Not enough for ordinary people to notice, but I could tell right away. A tingling sensation began at the base of my skull, spreading upward. 27 seconds. That's how long I had before the visitor would appear. I touched my ear twice, our signal to Sarah that I'd sensed something. Then I turned slowly, letting my senses guide me toward the source of the disturbance. 20 seconds. The sensation grew stronger as I walked casually toward the west side of the memorial. Tourists posed for photos on the steps. A family argued over dinner plans. 2 security guards chatted near a water fountain. 10 seconds. I spotted Sarah moving in the same direction from the opposite side, her pace measured, her head slightly bowed to avoid security cameras. 5 seconds. The tingling reached its peak, making the hair on my arms stand up. I'd felt this hundreds of times before, while working for the SIU, each time followed by the elimination of the person I was sensing. Today would be different. Today we would make contact. The visitor appeared exactly where my senses had led me, a man in his 50s with a digital camera hanging from his neck, wearing cargo shorts and a blue button-down shirt. He looked totally normal to most people. but I noticed the signs. Clothing that looked new but designed to blend in, slightly too perfect posture, and how he photographed specific angles of the memorial rather than the typical tourist shots. He walked over to a section of the memorial that didn't have any special inscriptions or notable features. Opening what appeared to be a guidebook, he positioned it to hide the small device he took out, something that looked like a smartphone but with an unusual arrangement of sensors along its edge. Sarah and I approached slowly, coming from different angles so we wouldn't spook him. We needed to make contact quickly but carefully. If he got scared, he might disappear before we could explain ourselves. That's when I saw them. 3 men in light summer clothes spread around the memorial plaza. Their casual poses couldn't hide their eyes, constantly checking everything or the tiny earpieces they wore. SIU field agents. My stomach tightened. How had they found us? Had they tracked our journey from Mexico after all? Or were they here because they too had figured out the pattern of visitor appearances? I caught Sarah's eye and tapped my wrist twice, the signal for SIU presence. She nodded slightly and continued approaching the visitor, adjusting her path to look more like a random tourist. Looking around again, I spotted a 4th agent near the top of the memorial steps. And then, coming out from a group of tourists, I saw a face I knew right away. James Wilson, my former colleague, trying to look casual as he moved toward the visitor. We were out of time. I stopped being subtle and walked straight to the visitor. The man looked up, sensing my approach. For a split second, fear showed on his face. The same fear I'd seen in countless visitors before I'd eliminated them. "I'm not with them," I said quietly as I reached him, gesturing as though asking him to take my photo. "I know what you are. I'm trying to help." His expression changed from fear to confusion, then to cautious interest. "You're approaching me directly. That's unusual. I used to work for the people hunting you," I explained quickly, positioning myself to block the approaching agent's line of sight. "But I know the truth now. You're historians, not threats." The visitor's eyes widened slightly. "You're Michael Thompson." The sound of my real name startled me. "How do you—" "Your elimination record is well documented in our time," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. His eyes darted past me, clearly spotting the approaching agents. "We've lost 17 researchers to you personally." The number shocked me. 17 lives I'd ended. 17 historians erased while trying to document the truth. My throat tightened. "I'm trying to make it right," I said. "We need to get you out of here. There are SIU agents closing in." The visitor closed his device and slipped it back into his pocket. "Too late for that, but not too late for this." He pressed a small metallic object into my palm, something the size of a coin but with an unusual texture. "Find the others," he whispered. "We have much to share." Before I could ask what he meant, a group of loud teenagers passed between us. When they moved on, the visitor was already walking away, joining a tour group going down the memorial steps. I turned to signal Sarah but saw James Wilson instead. He was standing about 15 feet away, looking at me with a blank face. Our eyes met for a moment. We used to work together, but now we were on opposite sides of a fight we didn't really understand when we first joined the SIU. "Run!" I mouthed to Sarah, who stood frozen at the edge of my peripheral vision. She disappeared into the crowd as planned. We'd set up rules for situations like this. Split up, take different ways out, meet at backup spots if we got away. I held the metal object and moved quickly toward the east side of the memorial, where there weren't many people. I didn't run. Running gets you noticed. Instead, I walked fast, taking a path to the nearest metro station. Behind me, I heard the SIU team talking to each other as they chased after us. They were pros, spreading out to block escape routes while looking like regular tourists or security guards. I reached Constitution Avenue and crossed with a group of school kids, using them as cover. The metro entrance was 3 blocks ahead. If I could get there and catch a train right away, I might lose them in the underground system. 2 blocks to go. I passed a hot dog vendor, slipping between families and office workers on lunch breaks. A quick look back showed 2 agents keeping up, trying to get closer without being obvious. 1 block. I could see the metro entrance now. I let myself walk a bit faster, moving through the people on the sidewalk. Then I saw him. A 3rd agent standing at the metro entrance, looking at everyone coming his way. They knew I'd try this way out. I changed direction, going east toward the National Mall. There was another metro entrance a few blocks away. If I could reach it before they changed their positions? The sidewalks got more crowded as I got near the museum area. Good. More people meant better hiding. I ducked into the National Gallery of Art, moving quickly through the main entrance hall and toward the back exit that would put me closer to the other metro station. The cool air inside the museum felt nice after the June heat. I walked past paintings and sculptures, keeping my pace normal but quick. A security guard looked at me but went back to watching some school kids drawing in front of a big painting. I left through the East Wing and kept going toward the Capitol South Metro station. I put the metal object in my pocket without looking at it. I could check it later if I got away. The streets near the Capitol weren't as crowded as the tourist areas. Bad for hiding, but I could move faster. I checked behind me. Nobody following. Maybe I'd lost them in the museum. The metro entrance appeared ahead. I hurried down the escalator, bought a fare card from a machine, and went through the gates just as a train was coming. Perfect timing. I got on the Blue Line train heading toward Arlington, choosing a middle car with several exits. As the doors closed, I looked at the platform one last time. That's when I saw him, James, running down the escalator, 2 other agents right behind him. The train pulled away from the station. I moved through the connecting doors to the next car, then the next, getting far from where James had seen me get on. At the next station, Federal Center, I stayed on the train, watching as people got off and on. No sign of anyone chasing me. The doors closed and we kept going to the next stop. At L'Enfant Plaza, a big transfer station, I got off and headed straight for the Yellow Line platform. If I could switch trains here, I might throw off anyone following me through the system. I went down the escalator to the lower platform, moving with all the commuters. The Yellow Line train was already boarding. I stepped inside, finding a spot near the doors where I could watch the platform. The train doors were about to close when I saw them, James and one of the other agents looking through the crowd from the escalator. James's eyes met mine through the train window just as the doors shut. The look on his face wasn't triumph or anger, but something more complicated, almost like regret. The train began to move. For a moment, I thought I'd made it. Then the emergency brake turned on with a screech of metal on metal. The lights flickered. Passengers started talking in confusion as the train stopped only 50 feet from the platform. "Ladies and gentlemen," came an announcement, "we're experiencing a momentary delay. Please remain calm and stay on the train." I knew what this meant. The SIU had enough influence to stop a metro train. They had me trapped in a metal tube with limited exits. Passengers looked around in confusion as the train sat motionless in the tunnel. I thought about what to do next. I could try forcing the emergency doors between cars, but that would attract immediate attention. I could wait until they came for me, but that gave up any advantage of surprise. Before I could decide, the doors at both ends of the car slid open. James entered from one end, another agent from the other. They wore no visible weapons, but I could tell what they wanted by how they moved, like pros who knew I couldn't get away. James walked toward me slowly, keeping his hands where everyone could see them. "Daniel," he said, "security needs to speak with you about an incident at the memorial." The other passengers watched curiously but weren't worried. To them, this looked like ordinary security doing their job. Perhaps I'd taken photos where I shouldn't have, or crossed some barrier at the monument. I knew better. This was the end of my freedom, possibly my life. "I left my bag," I said, playing along with the cover story while my mind raced for an escape. "Can I go back for it?" "We have your bag," James said smoothly. "If you'll come with us, we can sort this out quickly." The 3rd agent appeared at the train doors, blocking that exit. Trapped. I considered fighting my way out. I had training comparable to theirs, but in a crowded train car, civilians would be hurt. That wasn't who I was anymore. "Fine," I said quietly. James moved closer, speaking now in a voice only I could hear. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Mike." As he took my arm, I felt the metal object from the visitor press against my leg through my pocket. Whatever information it had, whatever connection to the others it might provide, I couldn't let the SIU get it. I tripped slightly against James, using the moment to slip my hand into my pocket and move the object into my sock. If they searched me, which they would, they might miss it there. "Sorry," I muttered, straightening up. James's eyes narrowed slightly, but he said nothing as he guided me off the train. The other agents fell in beside and behind me, maintaining a loose formation that both controlled my movements and blocked potential escape routes. As we came out from the metro station into the bright afternoon sunlight, a black SUV with tinted windows waited at the curb. Government plates. The side door slid open. "Get in," James said, his voice professional but not unkind. I took one last look around the Washington streets, wondering if Sarah had escaped, if she'd make it to our emergency meeting point in Baltimore. Then I ducked my head and entered the vehicle. The door closed behind me with a thunk. As the SUV pulled into traffic, I thought about the visitor's device secured to my ankle. I had to protect it no matter what. It was my only connection to the others. I sat in silence as the SUV with tinted windows drove through Washington traffic. James sat opposite me with a blank expression, while two other agents flanked me. No one spoke during the 40-minute drive that took us into Virginia woodland. We passed through a series of security checkpoints, each more thorough than the last. Armed guards checked identifications and inspected our vehicle before allowing us to proceed toward a nondescript gray building tucked among trees. "Welcome back," James said as the vehicle stopped at a rear entrance. The SIU headquarters looked exactly as I remembered it, plain from the outside, hiding what it really was. 2 years had passed since I'd walked out with my resignation, yet nothing had changed. The agents took me through security doors and down the same old beige hallways. We passed the operations center where I'd gotten my elimination assignments and the debriefing rooms where I'd reported my successes. When we got to the administrative wing, James sent the other agents away. "Just you and me from here," he said, leading me toward the director's office. "Tell him what he wants to know, Mike." Before I could respond, Director William Harris opened his door. His steel gray hair was perfectly trimmed, and his dark suit looked freshly pressed, as though he'd been expecting important company. "Michael," he said with his characteristic commanding tone, "come in." James stayed outside as Harris shut the door behind us. The office was just as plain and simple as I remembered, with a big desk and a window that looked out at the forest. No personal photos, no decorations, just the American flag in one corner and security monitors showing different parts of the facility. "Sit," Harris directed, pointing to a chair across from his desk. I noticed the unused restraint attachments on the chair arms as I sat down. Standard procedure for high-value interrogations. Harris studied me for several seconds. 2 years, he finally said. 2 years of resources wasted tracking you across continents. Was it worth it? I kept silent, recognizing the question as rhetorical. He opened a folder on his desk. "Michael Thompson, former Special Operations, recruited to SIU 5 years ago. 37 confirmed eliminations of temporal infiltrators. Resigned suddenly 2 years ago and disappeared." He looked up. "Then you showed up in South America, meeting with linguistics experts, moving through Chile, Peru, Colombia, creating encrypted websites, making contact with other sensitives, and now directly approaching a visitor on American soil." He closed the folder. "I'm curious about your motivation." I decided to be direct. "I know what they really are." Harris's expression remained unchanged. "And what might that be?" "They're not infiltrators or threats. They're historians from a future that's lost its past. They're here to document events, not change them. I watched carefully for his reaction. Surprise, denial, perhaps anger at my delusion. Instead, Harris leaned back in his chair, completely unfazed. "Of course we know what they are," he said matter-of-factly. "That's precisely why they're dangerous." His simple admission stunned me into silence. All this time I'd thought I'd discovered a truth the SIU didn't know or refused to acknowledge. "You knew?" I managed to ask. "All along?" "From the beginning," Harris said. "The first visitor was captured, not eliminated, back in 1983. We learned everything: their origin in the 23rd century, their purpose as historical researchers, their technology. The decision to eliminate rather than capture subsequent visitors was made at levels far above my pay grade. I struggled to process this. If you knew they were just historians, why kill them?" Harris stood and walked to the window, looking out at the trees. "History is never just anything, Michael. It's the most powerful force in human affairs. It shapes policy, public opinion, national identity. It justifies or condemns actions in the present." He turned to face me. "Those who control what people think happened basically control what's real to everyone. So the SIU's real mission isn't protecting national security," I said, the pieces finally fitting together. "It's controlling history." Harris gave a slight nod. "The visitors document everything with absolute accuracy. Military operations we've denied, political assassinations, government conspiracies, events that contradict our official narratives. How do you think the world would react if irrefutable evidence of those operations became public, not just in our time, but in any time? That's what this is about? Protecting government secrets?" "It's about stability," Harris corrected. "Some truths are too dangerous, even centuries later. The past must remain flexible for the present to function." I thought about the Book of Wars, with its detailed documentation of battles and covert operations that had never made it into official records. "So you eliminate the visitors to prevent them from documenting what actually happened?" "We eliminate them to maintain necessary historical ambiguity," Harris said. "Their version of events would be devastatingly precise without the context or justification for certain actions. Black and white where we need shades of gray." I leaned forward. "And what about the Book of Wars? The one I took?" Something flashed in Harris's eyes, the first genuine emotion I'd seen. "That book contains documentation of operations so classified that fewer than 20 people know they happened. Getting it back is a top priority." "That's why you brought me here," I realized. "Not to punish me for running, but to find out where I've hidden the book." Harris returned to his desk. "Where is it, Michael?" "Not here," I said. "Not anywhere you'll find it." Harris studied me. "You were one of our best agents. Your ability to sense the visitors gave us a tactical advantage no technology could match. I had hoped you might see reason and return to your duties." "My duties included killing innocent researchers," I said. 17 of them, by my count, all to help you control which parts of history get remembered." Harris's face hardened. "Those innocent researchers are gathering information that could destabilize governments, trigger international incidents, or worse. The past needs to stay buried, Michael, for everyone's sake." Before I could answer, Harris's secure phone rang. He looked at it, then back at me. "This conversation isn't finished." He pressed a button on his desk, and the door opened. "Keep him secure," he told a waiting guard, then picked up the phone. As I was led from the office into a waiting area next door, I saw James standing nearby, looking pale. I could tell he had heard everything through the SIU monitoring system. He looked shocked. The guard sat me in a chair where I could see Harris through the glass wall. He was on the phone with his back turned. James came over, walking stiffly, and sent the guard away with a few quiet words. When we were alone, James almost whispered, "Is it true? What you said about the visitors?" I nodded. "Every word. I have proof. Translations from their book, patterns of their appearances. They're documenting history, not threatening it. James ran a hand through his hair. And Harris, he confirmed it. All this time, we've been... He couldn't finish the sentence. Killing historians, I completed for him, to protect government secrets. Through the glass, we could see Harris still engaged in his call, gesturing emphatically. James made a decision. I saw it happen in real time. The change in his eyes, the squaring of his shoulders. "Security camera feed is looped for the next 3 minutes," he said, all hesitation gone from his voice. "Maintenance corridor behind us leads to the motor pool. I can get you out, but we need to move now." I stared at him, hardly believing what I was hearing. "You're helping me escape?" "I signed up to protect my country from threats," James said grimly. "Not to help cover up its crimes, but if we're doing this, we do it now." I didn't need to be told twice. James led me through a maintenance door and down a narrow corridor used by cleaning staff. We moved quickly but carefully, avoiding the main security checkpoints. James's access badge opened doors that would have been locked to anyone else. "What made you decide to help me?" I asked as we hurried through the building's lower level. "Denver," James said simply. I never bought the explanation for that disaster. And then what Harris just admitted. He shook his head. "There are lines I won't cross." We reached the motor pool, a large garage housing the SIU's fleet of unmarked vehicles. James grabbed keys from a security box and led me to a nondescript sedan. "This one's clean. No tracking systems active," he said, unlocking it. "I'll get you through the perimeter checkpoint, but after that, you're on your own." I paused before getting in. "Come with me. I'm meeting someone who can help us understand more about the visitors." James hesitated, then nodded. "If they find out I helped you, I'm finished here anyway." We drove through the compound, James showing his credentials at each checkpoint. The guards waved us through right away since everyone knew and trusted James. Within minutes, we were on the main road heading east. "They'll discover you're gone within 20 minutes, James said, checking the mirrors constantly. "Harris will lock down the facility and start tracking procedures. We need to switch vehicles as soon as possible." "I have a meeting point in Baltimore," I told him. "Someone's waiting for me there." "Your contact from Mexico City?" James asked. "The woman who can sense visitors too?" I nodded, not surprised he knew about Sarah. The SIU would have reviewed security footage from the Lincoln Memorial. 6 hours, James calculated. If we switch cars and take back roads, we might make it before they establish roadblocks. We stopped at a shopping mall 40 miles from the SIU facility. James purchased 2 prepaid phones with cash while I waited in the car, then drove to the far end of the parking lot. "Leave the car here," he said. "I'll handle the next part." He approached a middle-aged man getting into a regular sedan, showed him something in his wallet, probably his federal ID, and spoke briefly. The man nodded, looking nervous, and handed over his keys. James gave him something in return, then walked back to me. "Borrowed transportation," he explained, handing me the keys. "Owner gets a generous rental fee and picks up his car tomorrow from the impound lot where our SIU vehicle will mysteriously appear." We transferred to the borrowed car and took secondary highways northeast toward Baltimore. James used one of the prepaid phones to check traffic patterns, avoiding main routes where roadblocks might appear. "What's in Baltimore?" he asked after we'd been driving for an hour. I reached down and pulled the metal object from my sock. "The answer to that might be in here. A visitor gave it to me right before you caught me." James looked at the object in my hand, a metal disc about the size of a $50 with strange markings on it. "What is it?" "I don't know exactly," I admitted. "But the visitor told me to find the others when he gave it to me." "Other visitors?" "Maybe. Sarah might know more. She's been tracking visitor appearances for years." We drove in silence for a while, both processing the revelations of the day. Finally, James spoke again. "How many?" he asked quietly. "How many what?" "How many visitors did you eliminate during your time with the SIU?" I kept my eyes on the road. 37 confirmed. The numbers seemed worse now than ever before. James nodded slowly. 29 for me. That's 66 historians between us, Mike. 66 people just trying to record what happened. This harsh reality hung in the air as we drove toward Baltimore. We got to the edge of Baltimore just after dark, leaving our borrowed car in a long-term parking garage and taking public transportation to the harbor area. The emergency meeting point Sarah and I had set up was a small coffee shop near the National Aquarium, public enough to blend in, but with several ways out if needed. James and I came in separately, following counter-surveillance steps we'd both learned from the same SIU training. I went in first, looking around for Sarah while pretending to study the menu board. She sat in the back corner, a baseball cap pulled low over her face, a laptop open in front of her. I felt so relieved when I saw her. She'd made it out of DC safely. I ordered a coffee and made my way to her table. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw me. "You escaped," she said quietly as I sat down. "How?" "I had help." I nodded toward the door where James was now entering. "He's with me. We can trust him." Sarah tensed visibly as James approached our table. "That's your former SIU colleague." "Former is the key word," I said. "He helped me get out after learning the truth about the visitors." James sat down. "Sarah Martinez," he said. "We have a file on you. Self-taught expert in temporal anomalies. One of the few known sensitives not working for the government." "And you're James Wilson," Sarah replied coolly. "SIU elimination specialist with 29 confirmed kills of innocent historians." James accepted the accusation without defense. "Yes, that's who I was." I jumped in before things got worse. "Sarah, did you make it out of DC without problems?" She nodded. "I followed our backup plan, left the city immediately after you were captured, and came straight here." She turned her laptop toward me. "And I've been working on this." On the screen was a breakdown of the metal object the visitor had given me. I reached into my pocket and placed the actual device next to the computer. "You still have it," Sarah said, clearly relieved. "I was worried they'd found it when they searched you." "Ankle sock," I explained. "Old spy trick." James leaned forward, studying the object and the information on Sarah's screen. "What is it?" "A communication device," Sarah said, typing commands that brought up new data. "But not like anything made on Earth in our time. I've been analyzing its energy signature based on the scans I took in Mexico City before we separated." "You scanned it?" I asked, surprised. "I scan everything," Sarah said simply. "Habit." She pointed to a particular reading on her screen. "See this frequency pattern? It matches exactly with the temporal energy distortions I've recorded when visitors appear. This device is designed to communicate across their network." "Can you activate it?" James asked. Sarah shook her head. "Not fully, not without knowing the correct commands, but I did manage to extract some data." She typed again, bringing up a map. "Coordinates, programmed directly into the device's memory." The map showed a remote area in upstate New York, deep in the Adirondack Mountains. "What's there?" I asked. "Nothing on any official maps," Sarah said. "But based on the temporal energy readings I've detected over the past 5 years, it's a hotspot for visitor activity. Not just single appearances like we saw in DC, but multiple sustained presences." James studied the map. "That's completely isolated terrain. No roads within 10 miles of those coordinates. Why would they choose such a remote location?" "Privacy," I guessed. "Away from people, surveillance, and the SIU." Sarah closed her laptop. "I think it's more than that. I think it might be some kind of meeting point or base of operations." The implications of that hit me. "You think there are visitors permanently stationed there?" "It's possible," Sarah said. "The energy readings are different from the transient signatures I usually detect. More stable, more permanent." James sat back in his chair. "If that's true, the SIU doesn't know about it. We've never found any evidence of permanent visitor installations." I looked from Sarah to James, then back to the device on the table. "The visitor told me to find the others. I think he was giving us a way to contact them directly. All of them, not just individual researchers. If we go to these coordinates, Sarah said, we might find answers about why they're really here and what they're documenting. Or walk into a trap, James cautioned. The SIU will be looking for all three of us now. They'll have flagged your identities, frozen accounts, alerted border patrol and transportation hubs. Then we don't use known transportation, I said, a plan forming in my mind. We go off-grid, all the way to the Adirondacks. Sarah closed her laptop and slipped it into her bag. I have cash, clean IDs, and contacts who can help us get transportation without flags. James looked between us, then made his decision. I know safe houses we can use along the way. SIU emergency locations that don't appear in the main database. We stood to leave, aware that staying in one place too long increased our risk of detection. As we exited the coffee shop, I had the visitor's device in my pocket and remembered what we'd learned from Harris. The SIU wasn't protecting national security, it was controlling which version of history survived. The visitors weren't threats, they were witnesses, documenting truths powerful people wanted buried. And now, with coordinates to what might be their base of operations, we had a chance to connect with the others, whoever or whatever they might be. Sarah led the way toward the harbor, where her contact would be waiting with transportation. James followed, his training obvious in how he kept looking around our surroundings. I brought up the rear, staying watchful for any sign that someone was following us. The coordinates in the Adirondacks beckoned. A potential safe place where visitors gathered, where we might finally learn the full truth about the future historians and their mission to document the past. The dense Adirondack forest closed around us as we left the logging road that had taken us as far as it could. James led the way with a machete, clearing just enough brush for us to pass while leaving minimal evidence of our path. Sarah followed, checking her GPS unit every few minutes to make sure we stayed on course. I brought up the rear, with the visitor's metallic device in my pocket as we headed toward the coordinates. We'd spent 3 days getting here. Sarah's contact in Baltimore had provided an unmarked van with replaced plates, which we'd driven north through Pennsylvania before switching to a 4-wheel drive vehicle at another of James's off-books safe houses. The final leg had been on foot, a grueling 8-hour hike through wilderness without trails or human development. 1/2 kilometer, Sarah said, pausing to check her GPS again. We're close. My muscles hurt from the trip, but the device getting warmer kept me going. The tech seemed to know we were getting closer to whatever was at this location. James stopped suddenly and put his hand up. We froze. He pointed ahead where the trees opened up to a small clearing. That's it, Sarah whispered, checking her GPS one last time. Those are the exact coordinates. We approached cautiously, staying within the tree line. The clearing looked unremarkable, perhaps 50 yards across, ringed by very old pines and birches, with a floor of wild grasses and mountain flowers. No structures, no visible technology, nothing to suggest it was anything other than a natural forest opening. Are you sure this is right? James asked, scanning the area with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent years identifying threats. Sarah nodded. These are the exact coordinates from the device. I stepped forward into the clearing. The air pressure felt different. There's something here, I said. I can feel it. The device in my pocket was getting hot. I took it out, and we all looked at the metal disc as it started flashing blue. It's activated, Sarah said, her eyes wide. It must be responding to something in this location. James circled the perimeter, searching for hidden cameras or surveillance. I don't like being exposed like this. If the SIU has satellite coverage of this area. They don't, Sarah interrupted. I checked their imaging rotation schedules. This sector won't be scanned for another 4 hours. I held the device in my palm, watching as the blue pulsing quickened. What do I do with it? The visitor gave it to you, Sarah said. Maybe it responds to your touch specifically. I turned the disc over in my hand, studying the strange markings etched into its surface. They reminded me of the language in the Book of Wars, complex logographic symbols with no clear Earth origin. "Try pressing the center," Sarah suggested. "Most activation mechanisms are centralized." I put my thumb on the center of the disc. Nothing happened for a few seconds, and I started to pull my hand away. But then the device got warmer, and the pulsing light changed to a steady glow. A low buzz filled the clearing, so deep you could barely hear it. The air about 20 feet in front of us started to shimmer, like heat rising from hot pavement. "What's happening?" James asked, moving closer to us, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon at his hip. "I don't know," I admitted, watching as the shimmering intensified. The air seemed to bend, making what looked like a rip in empty space, a vertical line of pure darkness that slowly got wider. Within seconds, it had grown into a doorway floating in the air. Sarah gasped. "A temporal gateway. I've theorized they must use something like this, but I've never..." Her words trailed off as figures appeared in the darkness. 4 human-like figures stepped through the doorway and into the clearing. As they came through, I realized why the visitors always looked slightly strange in our world. This was how they really looked, not the disguises they wore when watching us. They were slightly taller than average humans, with proportions that seemed just a bit off, arms and legs a bit too long, bodies more slender. Their skin was pale and almost see-through, and their features looked almost carved. High cheekbones, large eyes in shades of amber and gray, bald heads. They all wore the same fitted clothes made of a material that seemed to both absorb and reflect light at the same time. "They're not wearing their disguises," Sarah whispered. "This is what they really look like." One of the visitors stepped forward. When it spoke, the voice was melodic and accented, but clearly English. "Michael Thompson," it said. "We've been expecting you." I stared, unable to find words. After years of hunting these beings, after killing 17 of them, I stood face to face with them in their true form. "How do you know my name?" I finally managed. "We know all the eliminators," a second visitor said, its voice deeper than the first. "Particularly those responsible for significant losses among our researchers." James stepped forward. "I'm one of them, too. James Wilson. 29 of your people died because of me." The visitors looked at him blankly. "We know." Sarah moved to stand beside me. "I'm Sarah Martinez. I've been tracking your appearances for years. I can sense you like Michael can." "The sensitives," said the third visitor. "You are rare among your kind. Valuable." I showed the glowing device. "The visitor at the Lincoln Memorial gave me this. He told me to find the others." "He meant you?" The first visitor nodded. "He was part of our research team. He took a big risk reaching out to you, but we all agreed we needed to after finding out you switched sides." "What is this place?" I asked, looking around the clearing. "Why here?" "This location sits at the nexus of certain electromagnetic fields that facilitate our temporal transitions," the fourth visitor explained. "We established this gateway 15 of your years ago, when our mission began in earnest." "Your mission," I repeated. "To document history." The first visitor, who seemed to be their leader, pointed to a fallen log at the edge of the clearing. "Please sit. We have much to explain, and your journey has been long." We sat, and the visitors arranged themselves across from us, moving smoothly. The gateway stayed open behind them, like a dark hole. "In our time," the leader began, "Earth suffered what we call the Great Data Collapse of 2187. During a period of global conflicts, the digital infrastructure that housed humanity's collective knowledge was systematically destroyed. Physical archives had long since been digitized and the originals discarded. When the networks failed, we lost nearly 3 centuries of recorded history." "Everything?" Sarah asked. "Books, films, documents?" "Not everything," the second visitor clarified. "Fragments survived. Enough for us to know what we had lost, but not enough to reconstruct it with accuracy. The gaps in our historical record created dangerous opportunities for manipulation and revision. Let me guess, James said. Governments and power brokers started rewriting the missing history to suit their agendas. The visitors looked at each other. Exactly, their leader confirmed. Within one generation, historical facts became political tools. Wars were erased or invented, heroes became villains, and villains became heroes. How easy it was to change the past created problems in the present. So, you developed time travel, I said, to see what actually happened. We developed temporal observation technology, the third visitor corrected. We cannot change the past. The physics of time displacement make that impossible. We can only observe, record, and return with accurate documentation. The Book of Wars, I said, understanding now. It's part of that documentation. The leader nodded. One of many volumes. We are particularly focused on documenting human conflict because understanding the true causes and outcomes of historical wars might prevent similar patterns in our time. But the SIU hunts you, Sarah said. They've been eliminating your researchers for decades. Yes, the fourth visitor said. Your government discovered our program in its early stages. Rather than welcome the accurate documentation of history, they perceived it as a threat to their control of historical narratives. That's what Director Harris told me, I admitted. He said some truths are too dangerous, that the past needs to remain flexible. The visitors' expressions didn't change, but something in their posture suggested disappointment rather than surprise. A common reaction among those who benefit from historical ambiguity, the leader said. In every era, there are those who prefer convenient myths to inconvenient truths. I stood up, couldn't stay seated anymore. I killed 17 of your researchers. I didn't know what they were. The SIU told us you were threats, infiltrators trying to change our timeline. We know what you were told, the leader said calmly, and we understand the nature of manipulation and misinformation. You were a tool of those who feared truth. I want to make it right, I said. I know classified details of operations I participated in, black ops missions that never made it into any official record. Intelligence activities the government denies ever happened. I can help fill in some of those gaps for you. The visitors seemed to communicate silently among themselves, subtle glances and small gestures that I couldn't interpret. Finally, the leader spoke again. Your offer is valuable, Michael Thompson. The first-hand accounts of participants in undocumented conflicts would significantly enhance our historical record. I'll tell you everything I know, I promised. Every operation, every location, every name I can remember. That would be most helpful, the second visitor said. But we require more than just your memories. What else do you need? I asked. Allies, the leader explained. Human allies with your unique abilities. Our researchers are at constant risk while conducting their documentation work. Sensitives like you and Sarah could help protect them, warn them when SIU agents approach. James stepped forward. I know SIU protocols, their tracking methods, elimination strategies. I can help too. The leader looked at him with amber eyes. Yes, your knowledge would be really helpful. Sarah moved beside me. I've been tracking visitor appearances for years. I've identified patterns, calculated probabilities for future observation missions. I want to help. Together, you represent an unprecedented opportunity, the leader said. With your assistance, we could complete our documentation mission with far fewer losses. The third visitor suddenly turned toward the still open gateway. We have a problem. The leader looked back, then turned to us again. Our sensors have picked up satellite imaging pointed at this location. It's not part of the regular schedule. They found us, James said grimly. The SIU must have tracked our movement patterns. How much time do we have? I asked. The satellite pass is complete, the fourth visitor said. Based on standard SIU response protocols, ground forces could arrive within 90 minutes. Sarah checked her watch. We need to move. If we head back to the vehicle now, you have a choice to make, the leader interrupted, looking directly at me. You can flee and continue your evasion of the SIU, or you can come with us. Come with you? I repeated. Where? To our base of operations, the leader explained. It exists slightly out of phase with your timeline, accessible through this gateway, but undetectable by your technology. There, we can protect you while you assist our documentation efforts. I looked at Sarah and James, then back to the visitors. All of us? All who choose to come, the leader confirmed. But the decision must be made now. Once we close this gateway, it cannot be reopened for some time without risking detection. James shook his head. I can't just disappear. I have family, people who would look for me. I understand, the leader said. Perhaps you can serve our cause in other ways. Sarah took my hand. I'm going wherever the answers are. I've spent my whole life trying to understand what you are and why you're here. I'm not turning back now. I thought about what awaited me if I stayed. Constant running, always looking over my shoulder, knowing the SIU would never stop hunting me. But I also thought about what I could offer these historians from the future. First-hand knowledge of events the government had erased from history, plus my ability to sense their researchers in the field. If I go with you, I asked the leader, can I still help protect your researchers in our timeline? Can I still make up for the harm I've done? That is precisely why we would welcome you, the leader replied. Your knowledge and abilities would be essential to our mission. I made my decision. I'll come with you. I'll help document the truth no matter what it costs. James put his hand on my shoulder. I can't go, but I can run interference. I'll head in the opposite direction, leave evidence of all three of us moving west. It might buy you time. They'll know you helped us escape, I warned. They'll come after you. James nodded. I know, but I need to make things right my own way. 29 lives I took based on lies. I'll find my own path to redemption. We hugged quickly, like soldiers do before a mission, fast and firm. Sarah and I gathered our stuff as the visitors headed toward the door. What should we expect? Sarah asked them. On your side? A research facility, the leader explained, where we analyze and compile our observations, where we train new field researchers, and where, with your help, we will continue our mission to preserve the truth of history. The distant sound of helicopter rotors echoed through the mountains. The SIU was coming. It's time, the leader said, gesturing toward the gateway. James checked his weapon and pack. I'll head north, then cut west, lead them away from here. He looked at me one last time. Good luck, Mike. Do what we should have been doing all along. Protect the truth. As he disappeared into the trees, Sarah and I approached the gateway with the 4 visitors. Beyond the doorway, I could see only darkness, but I felt no fear, only determination. After years of destroying these historians and their work, I would now help save it. I stepped through the gateway with Sarah beside me, leaving behind one world and entering another. I was now committed to making sure history, in all its complexity, would survive for future generations, no matter who tried to bury it.